Okay, so this is on designing the card in different ways. We will start from more simple designs to more complicated ones. This type is something I'd recommend for year one and year two students. So we basically have a sentence about one idea and one concept. In this case is how the kidney responds to hypoxia, and we have different blanks in the same card. This supports you to remember things as you start to learn them because it can be a little bit tricky when you start. But once you have learned this concept very well, you will make it more challenging by editing this card to make it such that uh, how does the kidney respond to hypoxia? And your job will be to describe all of this. So all of this should be hidden, basically. I really like this for learning new concepts, especially in physiology. One thing to note here is if you wanted to have multiple blanks in the same card, uh, your closes have to be of the same number, so they all have to be C1. And you do this by pressing Ctrl Shift Alt C. If you're not too familiar with this, you will need to watch the video titled Starting Off earlier in this page. Okay, moving on. This is also the same principle, but this is applied to something that is clinical. This is about restrictive lung diseases, and the same thing is happening here. I would use this more for year two students as as we're starting to learn different medical conditions. And again, as you become familiar with this concept, you wanna edit the card to make it harder, and you might say something like, "What are the features of restrictive lung diseases?" And your answer would be uh, basically everything else. Okay, and the next example is we can make a list. So this is again basic physiology, four types of cutaneous receptors, and we put each in a separate close. So this is what it looks like. If you're more in the clinical years at this point, you can use listing for different causes of conditions, different complications, differentials. I still use it for differentials quite a lot. And yeah, so listing is also very useful, and you do it this way. Notice as well that I always add a note. So this is interesting fact about receptors I add, and I like to add pictures as well, as I will show later. Uh, the next one is disease profiles, and this is something I emphasize a lot. If you are in clinical years, so towards your end of year two and up to year five, this is something that I highly recommend and I use very often. It basically gives you an idea about a condition from different angles. So you'll have the condition at the top. Pathophysiology is basically uh, what goes wrong in the normal physiology, the causes or causes of organisms, talk about the most common ones, presentation, what are the signs of symptoms, and what investigations you might do when you suspect in this condition, what complications it could lead to. Again, talk about the most common ones because often there is plenty, and the management. So first line, second line, whether it's whether you need to do some referrals or anything like that, that goes under management. And then I like to add a link to the website where I got my information from, or the book where I got my information from, in case I need to do more reading or I need to recheck some of the information I have. I also, in the extra section, I like to add interesting things over here. So if it's linked to other diseases or an exam tip that I've been taught, for example, by a doctor, or something I picked up on placement, and any picture. Now I'll show you an example of what this looks like on an actual card of mine. So over here, we will have a look at giant cell arteritis. So over here, I will need to remember pathophysiology, presentation, investigation, population management. Now you don't need to have all of these in one card always. Sometimes I have only pathophysiology, presentation, and investigation in one card, and then I have the rest in another card, depending on how large the card is. As a rule of thumb, you don't want to have too large of a card and you don't want to have too small of a card, somewhere in the middle. the more often I've done a card, the more I'm familiar with it, so I can actually have a big card because I'm just gonna go for a quick run through, and this is basically what it looks like. Um, and down here I have in the extra I have a link to patient.info, a really good website, and then I have a mind map that I've drawn on my iPad. I will talk later on things to do and use alongside Anki. Okay, and here's a picture again about it. All right, and show you that you can also do other things. So over here, I'm talking about epidural versus subdural hematoma, and I don't have pathophysiology investigations and all of that, but I've come up with different questions, and basically this is what it looks like. Oh, down here, I have different pictures of what it looks like on CT, and I've drawn my own explanation of why uh, subdural hematoma is caused by shrinking of the brain and how the bridging veins get taut and they're more vulnerable to be ruptured, basically. Okay, and over here I've added a classic presentation of epidural hematoma is blah blah blah. All right, so these are basically different structures of cards using the cloze deletions. I'll be talking in another video about the other type that I use. So that's all for now. Okay.